like to see your life.
I didn't know the camera was on, but now I know. Okay.
It's something we can do on our own.
Well, shall we begin?
Yes.
Okay. Affirmative. Let us begin with a prayer, and then the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and in the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady of Peace,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the third Advent reflection for this season. As I mentioned, the first reflection, and I think I mentioned it again yesterday or last week before Father Jonathan got started. Given the fact that we have the diorama here this year, we wanted to maybe just take some of the scenes and do the reflections based on those. So the first was on the Incarnation. The next one was on the dream of Saint Joseph. And so afterwards, please, if you haven't yet, please take time to kind of check out the diorama. And so today, we're going to be reflecting on the what's called in Spanish the posadas, or the looking for shelter or seeking a place to stay in the journey out towards the census. And so what I wanted to do is to begin with just reading the passage from the Gospel of Luke, which recounts that. Okay, so this is taken from the 2nd chapter of Luke, verses 1 to 7. Okay, so in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that the whole world should be enrolled. This was the first enrollment when Quirinius was governor of Syria. So all went to be enrolled, each to his own town. Joseph too went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David that is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, to be enrolled with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. While they were there, the time came for her to have her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son. She wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. So what I wanted to do is maybe have three main points. Okay? And so you can take your pick at which one you want to kind of focus on. So if you want to sleep during numbers 1 and 3, I'll let you know when 2 is up to bat. I'll tell you which one each one is, okay? So that way you can select. So the first one is going to focus on seeking shelter. The second is going to be regarding just sort of observing the poverty of it all. And the third is going to be a practical suggestion. Okay, and I gotta, full disclosure, the practical suggestion comes from, and this is a plug, have you guys ever heard of Maria von Trapp? Okay, so extra points if anybody can tell me who Maria von Trapp is. This is worth 20 million points, so hold on, no pressure. Sound of Music, that's correct. She's the Sound of Music lady. Yeah, round of applause for that 20 million points. So, whether you knew it or not, Maria von Trapp, she collected and put together some nice little reflections about traditions that they did as a family. Okay, so a friend of mine recently gave me, it's sort of funny, I had a little tiny book, like a little tiny one that was called A Land Without Sunday that somebody had given me. And I was telling her, I was like, oh, I'll give you this book. And in the meantime, she's getting this book for me. And it just so happens like that the little book that I gave her was just the final chapter in this one that she had already read. So I thought I was giving her something new. In fact, she was giving me something. So this book is called Around the Year with the Von Trapp Family. So that's going to be the third the idea on the third point is going to come from this. Okay, so you might want to stay tuned for that. Okay, so seeking shelter. Why did Mary lay him in a manger? Well, because, as we heard, there was no room for him in the inn. So let us try to contemplate this scene slowly. Okay, so we have Joseph and Mary traveling, seeking shelter. There, we could presume that it's late in the evening. They're looking to slow down their travels. Joseph speaking on behalf of Mary. He's knocking, asking for shelter to be received. He's asking on behalf of both Mary and Jesus, who is in her womb. Seeking entrance into the homes and the lodgings of those in Bethlehem. So the Jewish people in those days, they had a high esteem for hospitality and saw it as an obligation to receive people into the home, even to strangers and passers-by. But what happened is the answer that was given, because all of this was happening, the census was taking place, places were full, repeatedly they heard, there's no room here. So, obviously Mary was close to giving birth, and so the event may have been very stressful, trying to just find some place to be. And they come to find that there is no room for them in the inn. Now these words, if we think about them, they're challenging to us, I would say. They challenge us to consider our love, examine our own love, and also to consider the poverty or the humility of Jesus himself. Okay, I'd like to read for you all a line that was given by a homily of Pope Benedict XVI, so Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, and this was at a midnight mass. And he reads into the poverty of all that is going on in the events leading up to the actual birth of the child Jesus. What he says is really pretty beautiful. So he says, "It is as if God were saying, I know that my glory frightens you, and that you are trying to assert yourself in the face of my grandeur. So now I am coming to you as a child, so that you can accept me and love me." Okay? Just remember, I forgot to do my slides. My slides are not, they're just sort of a distraction, right? It's like popcorn at the movie. Okay? So there's not much to them other than something to chew on. So I just gotta go with it. Yeah. So Benedict XVI has a nice thought there. Because think about it this way. The Israelites, the Jewish people were waiting, the long expected Messiah. And maybe the anxiety was at a peak, at a fever pitch, and the expectations were so great. And God, knowing that we would be overwhelmed with his glory if he were to come in that way, he knew that he wanted to come in a way that we could palate, in a way that we could handle. So I'm coming to you as a child so that you can accept me and love me. So let's think about this for a moment. He recognizes that mankind has been, and we can say in some way will always be, waiting for God. We are waiting for him to draw near. That desire within us, wanting him to come close. Thousands of years ago, more than 2,000 years ago, 2021 years ago, when he came into the world, there was no room for him in the inns. So, this obviously, first and foremost, refers to Bethlehem in that account, that moment. The Son of David came into his own city, but he was born in a manger because there was no room for him at the inn, as we just heard. It also, we could broaden it, right? So it referred to that actual process, the actual movement. So, oops.
That's okay.
Yeah? Okay, good. Let's go on with that.
Keep you in line.
Popcorn. Because I know if we had coffee, it's probably too late for that. So,
Orange juice.
that's a good idea. Orange juice.
Yeah, decaf.
Decaf.
Right, please, yes.
Or half cap.
Okay, fine, I'll take it.
Can we edit this later? Well, we'll try it. We'll just put it into the caption. Please fast forward between minute, 3:21 to
Thanks.
3:40. There's nonsense there.
Right, we can laugh.
Okay. Okay, where was I? So, Bethlehem, we can broaden it to also, not being received into the inn in Bethlehem, but also it could be broadened to Israel, the Jewish people. So the one that was sent among them, the Messiah, was not received, rejected. Right? But we could also broaden it, even more greatly, and consider all of mankind. Right? So it refers to all of mankind rejecting the Creator, the one through whom all things were made, the one who, stooped down so low to basically beg us as if he were a desperate man wanting our attention, meticulously saying, "Here, I want to be in communion with you." But he's not listened to, he's not received. So what about us here and now? This idea of seeking shelter at the inn. What about us here and now? Well, Benedict XVI, in that same midnight mass homily, it's pretty sober. He speaks pretty directly. And what he says, I want to read it word for word. He says, to take up the question, what about us here and now? What about me? He says, man is so preoccupied with himself. He has such urgent need of all the space and all the time for his own things that nothing remains for others. For his neighbor, for the poor, for God. Right? So just interjecting, we think about oftentimes we put so much emphasis on production, on what's useful, on what, doing more, but neglect the things that are maybe more qualitative. Right? So relationships, things like that. And he continues, and the richer the men become, the more they fill up all the space by themselves, the less room there is for others. He came to his own home, and his own people received him not. For the Savior of the world, for him in whom all things were created, there was no room. Foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He who was crucified outside the city also came into the world outside the city. So, a consistent rejection in his own earthly life. And even today, to examine oneself. This should, give us a moment to reflect. What would happen if Mary and Joseph were to knock at my door? And maybe sometimes that happens. We have, so it's not to be scrupulous, but maybe there's those times where we feel the prompting to pray or to turn off the stuff and to crack open the Bible. Maybe there's like that silent, subtle little voice behind the scene sort of saying that to me, and nah. So what would happen if Mary and Joseph were to knock at my door? Would there be room for them? Do we have time for them? Are we turning away from God? So the faster we move, the more stuff that we have around us that makes things more efficient, more streamlined, quicker, we have less and less time for God. Right? So rather than making more time available because I'm able to accomplish things more quickly, ultimately what happens is I just start accomplishing more things. I just keep taking on more things rather than slowing down. Okay, and then here I'm going to quote back to Benedict XVI. He says something kind of interesting. He asks the question, does God actually have a place in our thinking? And what he means by that, he goes on to say, our process of thinking is structured in such a way that he simply ought not to exist. In other words, my life would be more comfortable if I didn't have this weight of guilt of thinking, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or I should be, etc., etc. So saying, is our thinking structured in such a way that if I could just, unhinge myself from the burden of having to attend to him, it would be much easier. Then I could do all the things that I want to do. He continues, this type of thinking is saying there's no room for him. Not even in our feelings and desires is there any room for him. We want ourselves. We want what we can seize hold of. We want happiness that is within our reach. We want our plans and our purposes to succeed. And he says, we are so full of ourselves. He's saying this on Christmas night, midnight mass. We are so full of ourselves that there is no room left for God. And that means, and this is the important point too, there is no room for others. There's no room for children. There's no room for the poor. There's no room for the stranger. Everybody else needs to be out of the way. Isolation. Isolated. No room. Okay? God seeking shelter. God seeking a place. Wanting to be relevant. Imagine, we have to think about this. This is God who has no need for us. He wants to be a welcome guest. Okay? So, number one. Whoops. Sorry, that was another slide that I forgot to do. Take that in.
Okay.
So for those who are going to watch this, or are watching this on the live stream, don't worry, the slides are not relevant. You're not missing anything because you can't see. Okay. The poverty of it all, section number 2. Now, in order to transition to our second point, something that emerges from this is obviously the poverty of it all. So Christ later on, when he's in his public ministry, a full-grown man at the age of 30, he would later say, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." So he was not happy with just telling us to be poor in spirit, but he gave us the example first. And so he provides an example of real poverty, humiliating poverty, and voluntary poverty. Okay, and in this little section here, so if you like the church fathers, I have a few nice quotes from church fathers. Okay, so real poverty, if you consider his bed, it was a place where animals eat. If you consider his room, right, it was like basically a backyard stable cave where the animals are kept. People who were not admitted to the inn, his visitors, were shepherds of the area. That's who came to see him. St. Cyril, he says, he finds man in his corrupt affections become like the beasts that perish. And therefore he is laid in the manger, in the place of food, that we, changing the life of beasts, might be brought to the knowledge that befits men, partaking not of hay, but of the heavenly bread, the life-giving body. So he finds us immersed in our passions, in our affections, like beasts, is what he's saying, St. Cyril. Being led only by my passions, doing whatever my mood is telling me to do. He finds us in this situation, and so he lays himself there, amongst the beasts. And then he becomes the food upon which they feed. Us. He becomes our food. So we no longer have to be enslaved to our passions, enslaved to the moods that come and go. But that he challenges us by teaching, and then makes it possible by sacrament. He challenges us and then helps us accomplish a higher life, to be like God's. But not in a way that is prideful like Adam and Eve did, but in a way that is according to his own heart. In a way that he, who is God, truly is. So, real poverty, humiliating poverty. It demeans the child before men who judge people by the measures of wealth or luxury. Right? So, what kind of house was he living in? Where was he living? What neighborhood is he from? Oh, he's from that town. He must be of great dignity. Oh, he's from that town. He was born there. I can't believe it. So shameful to be born there. Listen to what St. John Chrysostom has to say about him. Surely if he had so willed, he might have come moving the heavens, making the earth to shake and shooting forth his thunderbolts. That's probably the way we would have described it. God, hey, let me tell you how to come in.
Star Trek.
Exactly. Thunderbolts, smoke, all kinds of stuff. So St. Chrysostom, shooting forth his thunderbolts, but such was not the way of his going forth. His desire was not to destroy, but to save, and to trample upon human pride from its very birth. Therefore, he's not only a man, but a poor man, and has chosen a poor mother, who had not even a cradle where she might lay her newborn child. As it follows, she laid him in a manger. He wanted to trample on her pride. So, humiliating poverty. Voluntary poverty. So it is unquestionable that the Son of God could be born of greatness and in grandeur, luxury. Therefore, if they do not want him, it is not by necessity, but by choice. Bede the Venerable has a nice point here. He says, he who sits at his Father's right hand, okay? He who sits at his Father's right hand has no room in an inn, that he might prepare for us in his Father's house many mansions. He is born not in his Father's house, but in an inn and by the wayside, because through the mystery of the Incarnation, he was made the way by which to bring us to our country, where we shall enjoy the truth and the life. In other words, so that we may follow him, he who is the way, the truth, and the life. And we hear, got this one right, in the 12th verse of the chapter of Luke, we hear, et hoc vobis signum, and this will be a sign for you. The manger, the poverty of God, the child, is telling us that what so many people esteem so greatly is not worth so much. He shows us how little attention he pays to these things. All of the things that we esteem, all of the things that we, get ourselves all knotted up and wrapped up over. He esteems these things so little. He shows us how little attention he pays to these things, and he goes to the opposite extreme. Right? It is difficult to find a place so low where he makes his entrance into the world. He finds a stable almost in ruins, and there where he comes down, he was rich, says St. Paul. For your sake he became poor, though he was rich, so that by his poverty you might become rich. Right? So that's the point. That's why he came so poor, so that we would become rich. And just to conclude this point here, Fulton Sheen has a nice quote I'd like to read for you. He says, the stable is a place for outcasts, the ignored and the forgotten. The world might have expected the Son of God to be born in an inn. A stable would certainly be the last place in the world where one would look for him. And so the lesson is this: divinity is always where you least expect to find him. so the Son of God, made man, is invited to enter into his own world through a back door. Okay, so the third point is practical. Okay, so start a tradition. I'm just going to try to mark my page, but I didn't. Okay. So, the Von Trapp family had a nice little tradition that they would do. I like it a lot. So, it's almost like the posadas that was done popularly originally in Spain, but is also made popular in Mexico. But it's done within the house. Okay, so she writes, in the old country, we had in our house an oil painting showing St. Joseph leading the Blessed Mother who was with child, looking fatigued and tired, as they were asking shelter at the inn. Through the crack of the door, one could see the ugly, rough face of the innkeeper, and it was rather easy to guess what he had just said. Okay, so you can select any one of these pictures. Okay, so she says this picture played a big role during the last part of Advent in the custom what they call seeking shelter. So, by lot, she writes, 9 members of the household were chosen to be the hosts of this holy couple. Right? So within the family. So to be the hosts of this holy couple, to make up for their hard words, each one in turn offering room and shelter for one day. So the children especially vied with each other, she writes, decorating little altars with candles and fir branches and trying to outdo each other in loving care for the august visitors. The one who was the host for the day could have the picture in his room, spend as much time with the holy guests as he wanted, and school permitted. He could, for instance, take his meals with them upstairs. How inspiring this is for the imagination of the very young, sharing even their meals with the poor Holy Mother, who doesn't look so tired anymore and seems to like it here. Every night before evening prayers, the family would gather outside the room where the picture had stayed for the day, and in solemn procession, it would be carried through the house, accompanied by the singing of Advent songs until it reached the next resting place. Each evening, the scene before the closed door of the inn would be reenacted. They would sing what she called an old Austrian hymn, which is titled Who's Knocking at the Door? And she also relates, when they were in Mexico, she said, we learned that we have a similar custom there called the posada. On the 9 evenings before Christmas, they play the song from house to house. They invite the local priest who joins the procession, saying prayers. On 8 nights, the holy couple is refused shelter, and on the 9th evening, Christmas Eve, they are let into a house where everything is prepared most lovingly. A large cradle is waiting, while a statue of the infant is put on the straw. The cradle is rocked, and a famous lullaby is chanted. As the weeks of Advent are our busiest concert season, she said, we have had to give up this custom, but only in one respect. Every evening of these holy weeks of Advent, we sing our Christmas program in a different town. While doing so, we hope we may prepare a warm place for the homeless holy couple in many hearts among our audiences. So as they would tour as a singing family she said, found it difficult to do it in their home, so they did it from town to town. But I thought it was a nice little tradition to be able to, that could be, that could be done in your own home, it could be done amongst, family members, or if you don't have family members that are local, it could be done among friends. But to have that image and to console them, right? And so by allowing them to come into your heart and your mind and your soul that day, in a particular way, you are making that act of devotion to comfort them, right? As we know so well here with perpetual adoration and First Friday devotion, making acts of reparation, right? So this devotion could also be done in that vein, or in that spirit that there's been many times in my life where I just didn't think about him, just forgot about him. I was too busy, and I want to make that a real intentional practice and component of my Advent season. So these traditions are important and valuable, especially for the young. So, that's all I got. Okay? The looking for shelter at the end. Okay? I'm going to close off this thing.